Welcome back, students, to the second part of my lecture on Draupadi, where, as I promised, I will speak on the land tenure system in India, and we will look into the term tribe. So let's begin. The post-independent agrarian situation of India was can be understood by the several government measures taken by both the central and state governments to transform the nature of the Indian agrarian society. So we see that the government introduced the Panchayati Raj, the land reform measures, community development programs, and various other legislative measures to eliminate the feudal mode of exploitation that was in practice before India got its independence in 1947. All these were done in the interest of the farmers. Moreover, they provided assistance to small scale and cottage industries. The government also commissioned development of agriculture on the capitalist line, and obviously there were some changes in the economic structure of rural life. I say some because most of the benefits of these measures didn't even reach the lower strata of or to all the strata of the agrarian class. And when I mention the term strata of agrarian class, we can roughly divide the modern Indian agrarian class into four major categories. Those being, the first one being the rich farmers and the landlords, which who are said to constitute almost 7% of the population, and yet to possess 50% of the total land, each one of them owning 15 acres or more. So this is the first category in this agrarian class. The second are the middle farmers, who possess 30% of the total land. They constitute 19% of the population, and they own between 15 and 15 acres of land. So the interesting thing that we will see that the percentage of population, the less it is on the upper rung, and the more land they possess. Okay. So the rich farmers constituting 7%, they possess 50% of total land. The middle farmers constituting 19% of the population, they possess 30% of the total land. Now comes the poor farmers. They own between 1 to 5 acres of land and constitute 30% of the population, and they possess 17% of the total land. And last comes the agricultural labor, who own less than 1 acre. They possess only 2% of the total land but constitute 44% of the rural population. So the land is in the hands of a few, whereas most of the population in the agrarian society who belong to the poor farmers and agricultural labor class, they own very less percent of land, and therefore the discrepancy is very well visible to us. So this is the real Indian agrarian structure that hasn't changed in spite of introducing the several measures by the central and state governments. And the unmentioned class, even after this agricultural labor class, there are still a section of people whom we can call the sharecroppers and the landless wage earners. Even the agricultural labor, they own some land, some amount of land, however meager it may be. They can call it their land. But there are still the sharecroppers and the landless wage earners who reside at the very bottom of this structure. And what they have to do, they go about from one land to another land, obviously owned by other person, and they offer their labor in these lands, for which they are not paid properly. As a result, how their life cycle goes on, as a result, as they are not paid properly, they borrow at unreasonably high rates of interest from the money lenders, the village money lenders. The next step in their life is that they are unable to repay that debt. As a result, these already pauperized peasants, they mortgage any type of belongings that they have, and they are reduced to miserable tenants or sharecroppers. And therefore, in the capitalist mode of production that the government endeavored to start in the post-independent India, it produced a new class of bonded labor. Okay, these labor who were the proletariat. Okay, it gave rise to a new class of the proletariat poor tenants or the sub-tenants. Okay, the term proletariat means shorbohara. Okay, they cannot call anything to belong to them. Okay, do not have anything that they can call that belongs to them. And we see that the land is increasingly being concentrated in the hands of a few. Okay. Now, what happens apart from this sorry state of affairs? Other forms of exploitation rips apart their life as well. This is not the end. First of all, they are compelled to give begari, that is work under force, for the landlord's private chores. The landlord may instruct them to do his private works without even paying. Then comes the abwabs, or the illegal payments, where these poor peasants, they have to bear the cost of ceremonies in their employer's house on special occasions. If there is a puja, if there is a marriage ceremony, you have to go and work as well as you have to pay. And also there are various salamis to be given to these landlords. So besides poverty, besides not having the required amount of land to make their living, they had to suffer from these social exploitations and caste discriminations as well, whereby they were not allowed to enter any village gathering, where they were not allowed to enter the temples, not to use the wells from which people of upper caste people drew their water from. Okay, and not even to enter the compounds of the house of their employers. And all this continued. I mean, this is the picture not before independence but post independence. Remember that. And obviously these people in the residing in the interstices of the semi-feudal social structure, they were forced now to launch agrarian movements because their families were dying. They had no other option than to launch movements against this class of people who would forever take away from them. And herein the spring thunder of the 1960s in Naxalbari started. And the three police stations in Naxalbari, Khairabari and Phansi Dewa, they became the center of this movement. And we find that the first serious police encounter took place on 23rd of May 1967, in which a policeman was killed by the armed tribals. In retaliation, the police killed 11 people on the May 25th, including 7 women and 2 children, and several other peasants were arrested as well. Meanwhile, similar incidents spread to other parts of West Bengal, the 24 Parganas, Jalpaiguri. All these emerged as other centers of renewed Naxalite onslaught, and the main targets of these Naxalites were the landlords, the money lenders, the police spies, and whatever was so far subdued by the hands of the capitalist hands of the state now came to the forefront. And each and every people of the society, they came to know about such contradiction between the declarations of the state and its actual implementation. And the uprising, it spread immediately to the adjoining urban areas as well, like Calcutta, where the activist students and the progressive intellectuals, they took up the cause of the peasants in the society, in the country, and all of them, they fought hand in hand against the oppressive measures of the landlords, moneylenders, as well as the state. So this is the history of the Naxalite revolt in short. Now, if I do not describe to you the implication, the connotation that the term tribe has in our country, our understanding of the text Draupadi will be unfulfilled. So, what is a tribe? How it has been described in the Constitution of India? To the ordinary man, this word tribe suggests simple folk living in hills and forest. I quote, it suggests simple folk living in hills and forest. To people who are a little better informed, this word signified colorful folk famous for their dance and song. To an administrator, it means a group of citizens who are the special responsibility of the President of India. To an anthropologist, it indicates a special field of study. But nowhere in the Constitution there is a satisfactory definition of the term tribe. But since long, the word tribe, the word tribals, these words have been attached to land and forest. And that the tribals, they are always fighting off the outside forces who try to make inroads into their society for obvious reasons of cutting trees of their forest and as such. So these tribals, they resisted these outside forces because the one identity that they have is their association with the land and the forest, is their sense of community, is the great lifestyle that they lead away from the onslaughts of civilization. This is what defines their being. And also their tribal art, culture, wisdom, medicine, all these are not valued for things in themselves, but for parading to the world, and also for making money out of that. So obviously these simple people, they resent any commercial trade to be going on with their commodities that are their very style of living. It is not commodity for them. It is their way of life. Okay. So we find that they are living in a dismal state, trying to wend off these outsiders who constantly go to them in the or with the objective of occupying the land, cutting away the forest, or to sell the tribal art and medicine. Hearing a term, the denotified nomadic tribes of India is to be discussed. The one thing that I want to focus here is that these people who come under the denotified and nomadic tribes of India are branded as born criminals. This had been done in the colonial India by the British, who in the year 1871 had prepared an official list of criminal tribes, and they included any tribes who revolted against the British under this denotified and nomadic tribes of India. And mind, they were subjected to confinement, they were subjected to low paid work, and also they had to bear the name that they were born criminals. After India got independence, this denotified and nomadic tribes of India term was done away with, only to be substituted by a similar act, that is the Habitual Offenders Act, where this community was not called criminals directly, but it was to be understood that they were habituated to commit crimes. And the police forces, they were also in general in their army book taught to look upon the criminal tribes as born the tribes as born criminals, and therefore whenever in a village some criminal activities occur, the police are always to go to the part of the village where the tribals reside, and they start their interrogation there rather than from starting elsewhere in the village. So we see that this is the true condition of the tribals in India. And Mahashweta Devi, along with Ganesh N. Devi and Lakshman Gaikwad, founded in June 1998 a group called Denotified and Nomadic Tribes Rights Action Group. And it got the acronym DNT-RAG. They formed this group to investigate the death of Budhon Sarkar, a tribal belonging to Kheria Shobor community of West Bengal, who was brutally murdered in police custody. And this group was formed to work for the constitutional guaranteeing for the protection and human rights of the denotified and nomadic communities. And in the present day also, this association works for the cause of the tribals, the Dalits and the rural poor, who, sadly to say, still remain oppressed even as we are speaking. In my next lecture, I will be reading out the text to you. Thank you for today.